The Phoenicians were a coastal civilization which existed in modern-day Lebanon beginning in 2500 BC. The Phoenicians were skilled sailors and shipbuilders and began to find power and success in facilitating trade between the major civilizations during the time, primarily Greece and Egypt. They are most well known for creating the first alphabet, which simplified writing so that you only had to memorize a set of characters that could be combined to form words rather than memorizing unique words for every item. The Phoenicians began to spread outwards, establishing colonies in North Africa, including Carthage, where present-day Tunis is, and the colony of Tripolitania, based around the settlement of Tripoli. Tripoli was named in honor of an existing Phoenician city, so Tripoli is commonly referred to as Tripoli of the West in the Arab world. The Phoenicians' power began to falter as the larger, close-by Neo-Assyrian Empire began to conquer their homeland in the Levant, weakening their control over their colonies. In 631 BC, Greek settlers landed and founded the city of Cyrene, where modern-day Benghazi is. By 600 BC, however, the Carthaginian people who resided in Carthage and were descendants of the original Phoenician settlers conquered Tripolitania as part of their growing Mediterranean empire. While the Carthaginians continued the Phoenician tradition of maritime trade, they also had a focus on building a large military and growing their borders through conquest. Carthage initially signed a treaty with Rome in 508 BC that demarcated the borders of their respective empires to promote cooperation against a series of Greek wars of aggression, with the conflict being focused on the island of Sicily off southern Italy. Sicily had both Greek and Carthaginian settlements, which resulted in constant skirmishes. Although the Greek colonies on Sicily were supposed to be organized as a democracy, the skirmishes with the Carthaginians allowed tyrants, most notably Agathocles, to seize absolute control of the island, breaking away from Greece and creating the entity of Syracuse. Agathocles hired mercenaries called the Mamertines from mainland Italy to protect and fight for Syracuse. After Agathocles' death in 289 BC, the Mamertines went rogue and captured the Syracuse city of Messina for themselves. Messina was strategically located on the Straits of Messina and was a critical choke point to control the naval travel in the region. Syracuse forces began to try and take back Messina, so the Mamertines appealed to both the Romans and Carthaginians for assistance. The Carthaginians arrived first, setting up a garrison within Messina. The Romans saw this as an opportunity to confront Carthage and take control of Sicily. The Romans crossed the strait and began to fight the Carthaginians at sea and on land in what is known as the First Punic War. The Romans were able to take control of most of Sicily, but ran out of fighting power before being able to conquer Syracuse. They then tried to invade Carthage itself in North Africa, but were repelled, ending the war. Angry about their lost territory, the Carthaginians began a surprise invasion of Rome in 218 BC by marching north from Iberia, crossing the Alps, and attacking Rome from the north under the direction of extremely capable general Hannibal. The Romans were on the verge of defeat in Italy, so Roman General Scipio Africanus decided to instead send a naval fleet to attack Carthaginian territory on the Iberian Peninsula. The Romans defeated the Carthaginians here and took control of the Iberian Peninsula, chasing them all the way back to Carthage. Seeing the brevity of the situation, Hannibal withdrew his troops from Italy and returned to Carthage to defend the city. This conflict was known as the Second Punic War and saw Carthage see its influence reduced to North Africa. Africanus became a war hero in Rome, with the government declaring the continent of Africa to be named in his honor. The third and final Punic War began in 149 BC and saw Roman forces invade and conquer Carthage proper, putting North Africa in the hands of the Roman Empire. In the year 375, the Huns, a nomadic Central Asian tribe, began a military campaign west to conquer Europe. These campaigns caused local Germanic tribes to be displaced, with one of these tribes, the Vandals, being pushed west to the Iberian Peninsula. Later migrations of another barbarian tribe, the Visigoths, pushed the Vandals down in North Africa, where they conquered and took Carthage from the Romans in 435. The immense size of the Roman Empire at this time caused power to be split between two cities, Rome and Byzantium, creating the Western and Eastern Roman empires. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, power became concentrated in the east, with the new empire taking the name of the Byzantine Empire. In 530, Byzantine Emperor Justinian the Great made a push to reclaim the former glory of the Roman Empire by reconquering lost territories, including Tripolitania. Christian Byzantine rule was overthrown by the Rashidun Caliphate in 600, and then to the successor Sunni Umayyad Caliphate in 661. The Shia Abbasid family from Iran began an uprising against the Umayyad, replacing them with the Abbasid Caliphate in 750. In the North African region of the Caliphate, a separate sect of Shiites who trace their heritage back to Fatima daughter of Muhammad, began the Fatimid dynasty in 909, eventually pushing west and challenging the Abbasid Caliphate. Starting in 1140, Norman settlers in southern Italy invaded and conquered Tripolitania from the Muslims. Norman control was tumultuous and ended in 1229 with a series of Arab uprisings establishing the state of Tunisia, which remained independent until Ottoman conquest in 1553. By the end of the 1800s, European colonial goals turned to interior Africa, which was considered to them to be the last frontier untouched by colonialism. In 1911, Italy invaded Ottoman Tripolitania to regain control in a war called the Italo-Turkish War, with the creation of Italian Libya. This war, a precursor to World War I, saw the first use of aircraft in combat, as well as the dropping of the first aerial bomb in history. After World War I, Libyan rebels formed the Tripolitania Republic in western Libya. This independence was short-lived as Italian dictator Benito Mussolini quashed the government and combined the territories into a united Libya. Mussolini worked to modernize Libya to create what he called the Italian Fourth Shore. During World War II, the Italians were crushed from the west and east and North Africa by Americans and the British, with them losing control of Libya. Following the war, Libya became an independent kingdom in 1951 under King Idris. While Libya at this point was one of the poorest nations on earth, consisting mostly of desert, oil reserves were discovered in 1959, which overnight brought immense wealth. To the common people, most of this wealth was concentrated in the hands of the king, and in 1969, military officer Muammar Gaddafi overthrew Idris in a coup establishing the Libyan Arab Republic. Gaddafi quickly expropriated Italian property and forcibly expelled the 12,000 Italians still living in Libya. By 1975, Gaddafi was beginning to focus outwards to position Libya as the strongest link of the Islamic world. He published a political manifesto known as the Green Book, which advocated for a third way of governing that was in between communism and capitalism, and which incorporated elements of a direct democracy while also liberalizing the rights of women. While he was one of the most outspoken critics of Israel and Western intervention, he was ostracized by the rest of the Arab community due to his radical political beliefs. Following an attempted coup from more conservative Libyans, Gaddafi dissolved the current government and formed the Socialist People's Libyan Arab Republic, which would operate under his principles outlined in the Green Book. For the rest of the 70s, the average income for Libyans grew rapidly to the point it surpassed Saudi Arabia. Gaddafi took advantage of this newfound wealth to kickstart the construction of a mega project called the Great Man-Made River, which would see enormous pipes joined together to connect fresh water from aquifers in the south of Libya to the population centers in the north. The project, when completed, will be the world's largest irrigation project, but has yet to be finished as of today. Progress on the project was slowed by ensuing sanctions. Libya's isolation worsened in 1986 when they were accused by the Americans for bombing a discotheque in West Berlin, killing 3, despite extensive evidence produced by Germany and other European powers that Syria was behind the attack. Al-Assad of Syria, seeing the success of suicide bombing in Lebanon that had pushed the Americans out of Beirut just 3 years earlier, began to target European nations he deemed as meddling in the Middle East by ordering suicide bombing attacks there. The American government knew this as well, but continued to insist Libya was behind the attack because they did not have a clear answer on how to address the growing conflict between Syria and Israel. Libya was hit with incredibly tough sanctions, throwing its economy into disarray. In 1986, Assad struck Europe again by ordering the suicide bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Scotland, known as the Lockerbie bombing, which killed 270 people. Again, the Americans blamed Libya, with European intelligence agencies refuting this claim and stating that it was Syria who was responsible. At this point, the Reagan administration had to decide to turn the image of Gaddafi into one of an evil tyrant whose sole purpose was to destroy Israel in the West. To help protect his regime from American influence, Libya began producing a stockpile of mustard gas in 1987 and began exporting arms to the Irish Republican Army in their fight against the British. Growing up, Gaddafi had studied in the UK and had a simultaneous affinity and distaste for the country and despised the conservative nature of the Thatcher government. Throughout the 1990s, Libya attempted to create its own nuclear weapons, although they were never successful. These activities helped push the narrative that Gaddafi was, in fact, the evil mastermind who had been responsible for all the terror in the Middle East. The isolation of Libya continued until 2003 when the U.S. invaded Iraq to topple Saddam Hussein under the false pretense of destroying a large stockpile of weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs. When it became clear that Iraq did not have, in fact, the WMDs and that the whole situation was a ruse to the American public, the Bush administration and the UK government reapproached Gaddafi, offering him to drop sanctions if he publicly announced the destruction of Libyan chemical weapons, which were falsely portrayed as being a large stockpile big enough to cause mass destruction. Nevertheless, the announcement dealt a win for the US, who at least had Libya to show as a nation freed from the presence of WMDs. Quickly, Gaddafi went from pariah to hero of the West and was even invited to speak at the United Nations Assembly in 2009, where he spent 90 minutes incoherently trying to explain the ideology behind the Green Book. During the 80s, IBM was king of the computer world, producing vast amounts of computers for large corporations to transition their paper systems to. One of the greatest innovations provided by the adoption of computer technology was the creation of the credit score by FICO, which collected huge amounts of data on consumers to track their creditworthiness. This newfound intrusion scared the counterculture with visions of a dystopian world controlled by corporations, instigating the PC revolution. Following widespread adoption of the internet during the 1990s, the web was flooded with niche e-commerce stores, communities, and businesses in what was known as the dot-com bubble. The overhype of the era came crashing down in 2000 and saw the closure and consolidation of small websites into larger companies. Starting in 2005 with the advent of sites like MySpace and Facebook, a new technology boom was created based on social media. Social media became a powerful tool to influence and organize people. In 2011, amid corruption and stagnation within Tunisia, protesters organized a rally through Facebook and deposed the president. This unrest quickly spread to other parts of the Middle East, an event known as the Arab Spring. In Egypt, military dictator Hosni Mubarak was overthrown and replaced with the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood's leader, Mohammed Morsi. Protests also erupted in Libya to resist the authoritarian nature of the Gaddafi regime. Gaddafi resorted to violent measures to crush the rebellion based in the east of the country. In response to Gaddafi's harsh tactics, NATO instituted a no-fly zone over Libya, prohibiting the Libyan Air Force from being able to provide air support, greatly aiding the rebels. Once Tripoli had fallen to the rebels, Gaddafi and his most ardent supporters left the capital in a high-moving convoy headed to Burkina Faso to seek asylum. A NATO bomber noticed the convoy and proceeded to shell it, stopping it in its tracks. Gangs of rebels who had been chasing Gaddafi caught up to him, found Gaddafi hiding in a roadside sewage pipe, and executed him. Initially following the collapse of the Gaddafi government, the rebels proclaimed Libya to be under control of the Temporary National Transitional Council based in Benghazi in the east. The NTC was more conservative than the average Libyan and began to institute reforms to bring back Sharia law. Liberal Libyans concentrated in the West refused the result of the election and NTC rule and established the government of national accord based in Tripoli, beginning the Libyan civil war. Western backers, including America, initially supported the NTC and set up their embassies and operations in Benghazi. This increased American presence caused members of the NTC's military arm, the Libyan National Army, to attack the embassy and CIA office. The attack caught the U.S. off guard, with the Republican-controlled House launching an investigation into then-Secretary of State Hillary Clinton over her department's failure to prevent the attack. The investigation did not yield any indication that Clinton had acted negligently in her position at the time of the attack, although it did drudge up information surrounding the U.S. plot to divert attention from failures in Lebanon to that of the imaginary villain that was Muammar Gaddafi. The civil war raged on until 2020, when the Libyan National Army conceded that they had failed to capture Tripoli in the west of the country. In 2021, the Government of National Unity was formed, which stipulated that control of Libya would be split dually between Tripoli and Benghazi. This truce remains shaky as continued protests between the NTC and GNA supporters have continued and are still ongoing.